monsters wanna talk to me. No quarter drawn by lawyers on a crimson sea. Weep like willows, break like waves. We are fragile creatures on collision with our judgment day.
Hello, fellow Monster Whisperer. Hope you've had a chance to visit your wilderness trailhead over the last 2 weeks. If you missed that post, check it out in the link below. At the trailhead, we talked about the 3 acknowledgements. Number 1, acknowledge you have been wounded. Number 2, acknowledge this is also true for everyone else. And number 3, acknowledge the role you can play in easing the wounds of others. For today's post, we're going to talk about the Crossroads. This is where you'll have a decision to make regarding your story. Many trails may share a trailhead, or at some point you may encounter a split in the trail, a crossroads. What decision will you make? Which direction will you go? Who might be seen as the monster at this junction, and why? Over the past few weeks, I've been making time to connect with some local acquaintances whom I respect, just as a way to gain some perspective on where I'm at in my life. One of those people was my friend Tom Stenzel, speaker and meditation coach. He actually helped me craft my Dear Monster, I Love You talk, and I'm forever grateful for that experience. We grabbed a coffee and shared about life. After our meeting, Tom sent me an email with some resources to check out. One of those resources was the book, The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Maté. I haven't read the book yet, but right after getting that email, I got another one from the Internal Family Systems Organization regarding an upcoming workshop on collective trauma organized by Thomas Hübl, featuring a session with Gabor Maté. Coincidence? Nope. I don't believe in coincidence, but I do believe in receiving clues from God or the universe. So this had my attention, and I made it a point to watch that workshop. In the workshop, Dr. Maté talked about authenticity versus attachment. It was fascinating. He said, as human babies, we all desire attachment to other humans, initially our parents. When born, our brains are not fully developed, so we're dependent on others for our survival. This need for attachment begins as a survival technique. And as we grow, we look for attachment through other relationships. The need for human connections is an inherent desire in all of us. Yes, even my introverts, we need human connections too. We just might be more selective about those connections. So at its start, attachment is good and healthy. The challenge comes when we begin to understand our identity. Prior to understanding our identities, attachment may be seen through conformity. We want to fit in, so we start to take on the personas of those we're attached to. We're conforming to the herd mentality. But something changes when our identities become more clear to us. Accepting our identities leads us to authenticity. It sounds great, doesn't it? But this acceptance of authenticity means we'll most likely need to turn our backs, at least to some degree, to conformity. We have to consciously choose to give up attachment for authenticity. You're probably seeing how this maybe isn't so great. It's conflicting. One side, attachment, represents comfort, perceived normalcy, acceptance, the known. The other side, authenticity, represents uncertainty, perceived danger, the unknown, the wilderness. Dr. Maté posits that most of us actually end up choosing acceptance over authenticity. And he's quick to point out that this leads to stress, perhaps to trauma, a crisis of identity that we may not fully understand because we're too afraid of even making the effort to explore authenticity. He implies that authenticity may help to relieve the stress and trauma. And although I don't disagree with that statement, it feels incomplete to me, because I believe accepting authenticity over attachment has its own level of stress associated with it, at least initially when we're transitioning from acceptance to authenticity. We have to be willing to let go of fitting in. We have to be willing to acknowledge when the herd mentality isn't aligning with our authentic self. For the rest of the folks living from attachment, this can feel like abandonment, or at least it may feel like their own lives of attachment are no longer valid. That's actually not a bad thing, but it is a hard thing. It's hard because it will create friction. The herd feels safe because they feel right. If someone challenges that feeling of safety, they'll get defensive. I feel like most of my life, until recently at least, I've teetered between attachment and authenticity. I can't tell you whoever said this to me, but from a very young age, I remember hearing the phrase, "Why can't you just be like everyone else?" I don't know how often it was said to me, or honestly if it was ever said to me at all, but I heard it frequently. It made me very aware at a young age and throughout my life that those two conditions, attachment and authenticity, were opposed. The good news is authentic people can still find healthy connections with other people. When that connection is with other authentic people, the best of humanity is exposed. This may sound weird, but when I was putting this post together about the Crossroads, one name came to mind. If you're into the history of American music, you may know where I'm going with this. The name is Robert Johnson. Please tell me you know this man. If not, please tell me you'll look into who this man is. He's known for being one of the most, if not the most, influential blues musicians in history. But how he got there is a mysterious tale, the stuff legends are made of. And I think there's a parallel between this legend and the shift from attachment to authenticity. Let me explain. There's not a lot that is definitively confirmed about Robert Johnson. He was most likely born in 1911 in Hazelhurst, Mississippi, and eventually settled near Robinsonville, Mississippi for a time. He loved music at a young age, but was a terrible guitar player until ... This is where the legend picks up. Around the age of 20, he leaves town. 2 years later, he comes back and he is a master at playing the blues on his guitar. Such a fast and mysterious transformation. This mess of a musician returns a genius artist. How did it happen? The legend says Johnson received some message to take his guitar to a junction of two roads, the Crossroads. Here he met the devil and decided to sell his soul in return for becoming a great guitarist. Let's pause and think about this. I want to present this as an illustration about attachment and authenticity. There's a lot to dig through here. Johnson was connected to his community in Robinsonville. It was his home. He was with his people. But he knew he loved music and he began to have a desire to be great. So he leaves. You could say that anytime we leave the life we're familiar with, we're entering a wilderness experience. I believe this to be true for Robert Johnson at this particular point in his life. He escapes the familiar for the unfamiliar in search of himself. And clearly he finds it. However it happened, whoever he actually learned from, he is transformed into the person he was born to be. Then he returns to what was formerly familiar. When we come home after an experience like that, there's an instant realization that something is different. The changed person feels it in those who stayed behind. Those who stayed behind feel it in the changed person. It's just weird. The thing is, the person who has the wilderness experience has a new perspective that can't be understood by those who haven't had that experience yet. Even if this experience was positive for the individual who found authenticity, those who remain attached may feel threatened and need a way to justify their decision to remain attached. This often comes at the expense of the authentic person. It's easy for those who lack perspective to vilify those who are different. This actually has deeper roots in monster theory in regards to bigger cultural issues like racism. We're comfortable in our attachment and don't want the discomfort of change, so we make the other the villain. The other becomes the monster. And untruths may be born as a way to explain why someone else's authenticity is bad or dangerous. These untruths may sound like this. He obviously met the devil at the crossroads and sold his soul to gain his talent. Authentic identity is perceived as monstrous to those living in attachment. Lucky for us, Robert Johnson leaned into his identity and gave us some of the most iconic and meaningful blues music our world has ever received. A few years later, he recorded his original songs that we all can enjoy and learn from to this day. A few years after that, around the age of 27, he was dead. Most believe he was poisoned. He died too soon, but thankfully not before he could leave his fingerprints on our world. Where are you at with this crossroads? Are you living out of attachment or authenticity? Both can be healthy depending on our states in life, as long as we're aware of the consequences of each. Be open to progressing from attachment to authenticity, because this is the only route that allows you to influence your world with your identity. And we need your identity influencing our world. Consider the journey in Crossroads. Consider the decision and the consequences. Choose to take that first step into the wilderness and be ready to receive from the journey ahead. Until next time, have a great day and keep whispering.
Monsters wanna talk to me.